Okay, so coming up, you will need a Stripe account that is Connect enabled. It's pretty easy to do. Just click Get Started on the Connect dashboard and go to Town. Make sure that you're just using test data. I think you only can until you activate your Stripe account. And then you need another account that's more, think of it as the merchant account, the person who's creating the project and configuring it to be their source of income based on the perks offered. So what I'll actually do is use existing accounts I have to save time. So I have another account that's just for WebCrunch, and then one in here that I just titled Back My Idea for this app alone, and I've enabled Connect on it. And it's going to be the platform behind the scenes, collecting its own cut of each transaction, but also providing the service to the other users in our app. So what I'll need to do first is basically enable our app to use a few OmniAuth setup preferences, which will also configure the Stripe gem as well. Now you need a set of keys to get your app running, and Stripe has those in the dashboard. One that's going to ask for is your Stripe Connect ID, and it took me forever to find it. But if you go to your actual dashboard, there's a Settings tab. Go to Connect Settings, and below that there'll be an ID as well. We'll need to add a callback URL, which I already did to this one, but I'll show you how to do that coming up. In the test mode, you'll need a key that looks like this to be the platform that Connect connects to. And with that, you'll also need Stripe test keys that are your normal test keys for the developer API stuff. So all your API keys here. So you'll have a publishable key and a secret key. So you'll need 3 keys total. And I think that would be it. So we can get the rest of the keys, and how it works is we'll actually connect to other user accounts. So the merchant account, like I mentioned before, we can pull from the API their keys and use them without really, exchanging keys in our app per se. We do that in a sense, but it's not in a way that Stripe wouldn't recommend. So what I'll do now at this point is install a few gems and get that show going, and then we'll kind of work our way up from there, generating a few migrations to add the fields we need to make this all work. So we'll need definitely the Stripe gem. So Stripe, I'm just going to leave the version out, and then we need the OmniAuth gem itself. So OmniAuth, and I use this version that was up into 1.9, and not get gem. And then finally, there's a gem called OmniAuth Stripe Connect, which saves a load of time doing this kind of process. I really recommend it. And it's just a wrapper for that connection flow. Okay. I'll do a bundle install there, and I'll just quit the server for now. Sweet. All right, so we need to add a migration at this point. I'll just go and do so here. We're going to add a few fields for Stripe specifically to the customer or user model. This is going to point to their user ID in Stripe, which is typically a count underscore a bunch of characters, what provider, and their access code, which is kind of their private key, and their publishable key. So we'll add those fields so we have access to them as the person or platform overseeing these charges between the app itself and the customer's Stripe accounts. So obviously you need a Stripe account for this to work if you're coming into the app. You can do this with other providers as well, but man, would that get hairy fast. So consider yourself warned otherwise. So let's create a migration and add those fields I talked about just now. So Stripe fields to users. We're going to call one UID. You could call this Stripe ID as well, Stripe user ID, so it makes more sense to you. You might need to do that if you have more than one payment provider, just so it makes sense. Same with provider, it's pretty generic. String, access code, string, publishable, key is string. So much like we need our own keys in our app, this is how we're going to add the customer's keys into the app. Okay. And let's go check out that migration to make sure I spelt everything right, because knowing me, I am terrible at that. And I think that looks good. So we'll just migrate that. Okay, great. So since we have that gem installed, the auth and OmniAuth Stripe Connect, we need ways to connect to Stripe initially. And we can do that through devise initially. And what I'll do is go into our config in Initializer's file or folder and find devise. At the very end, I'm going to add this bit of logic. Config.omniauth. Okay, so that's what I ended up with in my initializer file. What's happening here is I'm passing in my own keys for these to work. It's going to need the connect client ID, as you can see, and then also my own secret key. Our publishable key will be accessible in the app, but we'll need it to make the source for charges. So more on that in a bit. It's kind of complicated, but I'm going to confirm I've typed and told you the right thing here before we move on, because otherwise that would suck. Yeah, so I think that's good. So this OmniAuth Stripe Connect is part of that gem we created, or installed, I should say. And we don't have these keys yet, so we actually need to add those coming up. So what we can do is do that. And Rails, there's many ways to do this. There's gems you could use, but Rails now comes with secret key credentials or encrypted credentials. And I already know it's going to error out if I just don't type this. So if we say editor, my version or my code editor is VS Code. Wait, we can run bin or just Rails credentials edit. That should open up your credentials file that's been encrypted. It's right now, here's what it looks like. There's a secret key base, and then you could add Stripe and then what those were called. So we called one connect client ID, and then another one was private key, and then I'm going to put public key too, because I'm going to need that on the front end, I believe. And I'll grab mine real quick. You'll have to go get yours. Remember, I told you the client ID is on your settings tab, and then into the connect settings on the bottom right here. And in fact, you've already seen mine, so it's not a big deal. Just it's live mode, so you'll want to go to the test mode, of course. Grab that, paste those in. And the same for your private and public key. I'll go get my public key, but I'll keep my private key to myself. But I think you guys can handle it. Okay, when you save that file, it encrypts it and saves it. So the cool thing here is when you're in a production environment, you don't have to go add your keys to some server every time. They're just encrypted and ready to roll. The catch is you need to make sure you pass in an environment variable for your master key that gets generated in your app. With whatever provider you're using, whether it's like Heroku or I use Hatchbox, and you'll need that environment variable. This I'll show you Y production here. If you go to, where am I at? If you read this line, ensures that a master key has been made available in either in env Rails master key or in config master key. The key is used to decrypt credentials. So when I put this live on a production app server and pass this config master key true, you need to provide this environment on your server and then pass that through. That way your keys can be accessible by the app. Otherwise, it's secure enough that Rails won't let you, boot the app because the keys aren't found. So that's a long story short of how that works. So with this done, we can essentially say good to go. Now, before I do that though, we did this command. So if you want to do it scope 2 per environment, you totally can. You can pass in environment development or test, whatever you want to do. And it'll create a new folder in your config folder right here called credentials. And within it, it'll add in the environment you create and its own master key. So the one we're using right now is considered to be the production level 1, but if you want to have different keys for development than your production, that's how you could set that up. I'll probably include that in the blog post, but not the actual videos here, just to save some time. So what do we want to do next is create an initializer for Stripe. That way we can talk to the API with each request. So we'll say Rails make a hash, and we'll set a publishable key and private key. So this is where we're doing that. So here's what that looks like, and it's a hash, so it's gonna kind of look like the old style. Dig, we'll say Stripe and public key. Just copy this and change publishable to private or secret here, but I called it private here. It's kind of confusing. All right, and then finally we need to set Stripe, call the Stripe class API key is the same as the dealio here. I guess I'm showing, not sure why this is doing this. Here we go. And I'm gonna lose the comma on this one here. Okay, now it's probably worth checking these in the console. You can just go Rails console just to run the same command. I'll just do it on my public key just so I don't expose my private key. But that's how you can verify these get output. So we'll say Rails console, just pass that through, and it's nil. So guys, I needed to create a development environment to get this to actually work, and sadly I need to copy what I did to the from the production environment. So I think because I'm local, it's expecting the development environment for this to work. So I'm gonna do that real quick and be right back. Let's try to pull back the public key. Still no, I don't understand this. Alright guys, so I was troubleshooting why I couldn't return my credentials in the console, but this is how I usually do it. And the problem was I needed to run, if you've ever run into this, there's this weird caching thing with Spring that's loaded with Rails. And if you run Spring stop, that should like fix things. It's so weird, it happens every so often. Finally I did that after 800 tries, and this actually returns the key I want thanks to the console. So that's good. Everything's working swimmingly there. So next we need to, I'm going to boot up the server. If you've added your keys, you should be all set. We just need to kind of configure things from here. So we've already connected Devise thanks to that configuration in the initializer. We need to go ahead and figure out the associations now. Devise uses these adapters on the model layer. So on the user layer, you see these modules that you can include. We need to actually provide one that's both, we need to add omni-authable. You see it in the comment up there, but I'm going to just type it. And omni-auth providers. Now this could be many providers. You could have like sign in with whatever, but in our case it's going to be Stripe Connect. So you could add like Facebook or Twitter or GitHub or something there if you want to add those. I've done another video about Twitter specifically I mean. With that added, we need to just configure the routes next. So config routes, and we'll go to Devise 4, this line right here. We're going to extend it a bit just to include controllers. And we'll specifically call out omni-auth callbacks and use this controller as kind of the source. So what we need to do at that point is create a controller that's called that. So omni-auth controller, I'll just create it manually. So new file, omni-auth controller, or callbacks controller. Within that, we'll add a class with some constant instance variables in it that are it's gonna be kind of gnarly, but it probably makes sense after you see it all. Auth callbacks controller. We could have generated this, but I wanted you to see it inherits from Devise, and then also Devise's own omni-auth callbacks controller. Okay, so within here we're going to add that method that we created that was a provider in our model. So it's called Stripe Connect. That's what we've been calling it all along. So we'll do the same here. And then from this gem, we're able to parse what is the request that comes back from when we go omni-auth to Stripe based on the URL you get from them. So we can, from the request, parse certain things that come back in values. So env, and we'll say omni-auth .auth, and we'll say user is going to be the current user, and then if the user's persisted, which means did it save, we'll say at user provider. These are the columns we added before, so we get it back in this data. And it's going to vary depending on your provider, but a lot of them follow the same conventions. So at user UID in our case is auth data UID, and user.access code. This is all coming from the Stripe requests cycle. Is equals to auth data credentials token. So we get a token back, not their actual private key, which is good. Full key equals auth data info Stripe publishable. So we get that one back on the user's account who's in the Stripe app, and then we'll say user.save as a result. Then with Devise, we get this method sign in and redirect at user, and event will be authentication. Flash notice, you can throw these anywhere now. So we could just say, you could just say notice too if you wanted. But we'll say Stripe account created and connected. if is, this is a method from devise as well. And we'll say else, and so we'll just redirect back to root path there. And then there's a method of failure that you can call as well. That's just kind of a common thing in the OmniAuth world. So failure, and we just say redirect to root path. You could provide some context of why, but I'm just leaving it as is for now. Great. So now we need to build this URL that the user is going to click to authenticate with this OmniAuth callback. And the way that's going to work is just rendering a link with some parameters we'll pass through. That's going to basically dictate this authentication method. And what we'll do first is create some helpers that define what those are. So in my application helper, I'll just add this here, and we're just going to say Stripe URL. And it's going to look a little wonky, but we'll say https connect.stripe.com/oauth/authorize with a question mark, response type equals code, and client underscore ID equals, we're going to do some interpolation here. So we'll say that ID we just added to our keys, and we'll say dig stripe, and we'll do connect client ID, and scope equals read write. There we go. So essentially that we need to pass the client ID through, and then that will make things work. Another method we can add that's going to be helpful when we get to the view layer is it can receive payments, basically checking if that user has authenticated their Stripe connection yet. If they didn't, they can't go ahead and create a new project or receive money yet. We're just going to check if any of these exist. It's kind of overdo it, but it works. Publishable. It's got to have all those. So that should do it. And then one more I'm going to add, just because actually this should go in the user model. Excuse me. Let's go add that because we're going to chain it. And in the application helper, I'm going to add a Stripe button because it's going to be kind of a pain to do this in the view. So we're going to link to Stripe URL class button Stripe connect do block, indented too far there, and within that we'll have a content tag span, and we'll just say connect with Stripe. Okay, so in the view we can actually reference this and just render it verbatim. So I'll go actually to the devise space, and the registrations is where we're going to go into the views. So the views, devise, registrations, and I think edit is what we're looking for. And I did change this up a bit. I think I'm going to save time and render. So I'm going to paste this in. We can ignore this bit for now. And I'm going to call that stripe button stripe connect button, actually. So like I did here, I think I did that on purpose, stripe connect button. And okay, so in our actual edit file, now we'll see a little bit different of a layout. Let's go to, what happened? Looks like I forgot. Spelling error on the user model. User. There we go. I'll go back here. If we go to account settings, which I need to add still, so let me go to the layout. I'll just kind of copy this and say account. And it'll be edit user registration. Path, get rid of that method. I think that should do it. Then we have account. There we go. Now we have this look and feel. I've added just a content block that essentially we've changed the edit file. Let me go find it. Jeez, sorry. I removed the content for wrapper I had before this and just added a container. Each side is a width full and on mobile and half on large screens. And then on the right side, I just added a new section for the Stripe button. So if they can actually receive payments, we're not going to register. But if they can receive payments, we're just going to give them a good successfully connected to Stripe message. Just something really simple there. So once we finally enable this, we'll be ready to rock and roll. I've added that CSS before for the Stripe button. So if you don't see the same look and feel, if you go to buttons, at the very bottom is a bunch of stuff I've added. That's on the Stripe docs if you want to find it, but you can also just steal it from here. That's just to kind of get the branding down there. And then one extra thing you might forget, but you shouldn't, is adding a redirect URI. You need to add one here in your Stripe settings. This is in your settings, and then you need to go to the redirect section. You can add a URI by clicking here and just paste the URL. This is the one we need specifically. So it's /users auth stripe connect callback. If you're curious where that comes from, we can go to routes and then you go to users. And since we've added that new Stripe Connect OmniAuth provider, we get these helpers by default, and that's just the way this URL is going to build. So we've got that users auth Stripe Connect callback, doing a get and post return here. So that's all pointing to that OmniAuth callback Stripe controller with that method we created on it. So when we do process that URL and push that button, it goes and fetches that, and it does a get and post kind of concept. So while you're here in the Stripe Connect area, you might consider branding. I just added a business name for now, and then I chose a different color here just to go ahead and run with it. So yeah, that is what we're looking at for the UI and getting the redirects in order. So once you actually finally go redirect to by the or connect your settings, let me go to localhost again. Assuming you want to create a project, you're creating a project on this platform, you can connect your account to Stripe. So mine's going to be the actual platform account, so I can't connect it myself, which I showed you in the very beginning. So instead, if you switch to a new account, so say one you want to actually sell things on, you could just do, I'll just do my dummy account here. I've already kind of initialized this, but it should give you the idea of when you sign in, you'll go to this kind of page, and it by default, this banner is in development mode since we're in development mode, but in the production environment, you'd have to fill out this form and get all your business related data there. Otherwise, you can skip the account and then authorize your account to redirect back to here. Looks like I have a syntax error though, so I think I have an extra ending block in what file? Omniath callbacks. Failure. I think it's this one. Let's double check though. I think it's this here. I'm not supposed to have a comma. There we go. Let's try that again though. Am I connected? Go to Stripe, authorize, skip this one for now. There we go. Yep. So if you had that comma there, get rid of it. So I need a new user account though, sadly. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to create a new one. Yeah, forgo that. But let's see if our settings were saved for the last user. So let's see, Rails console, user.last. Notice there's keys and stuff now. Isn't that cool? So all that stuff was added thanks to that request and API cycle. We get the UID with the account name, the provider, Stripe Connect. It could be Stripe, I don't know, something else. And then our keys. So that's exactly what we're after. And once that happens, your account is considered connected and you're authenticated to start selling. So that's one side of the equation. Now we need to worry about adding subscriptions and whatnot to projects, and that's going to require some nested attributes and what I'm calling perks. We're going to run into those here if you saw it in the very beginning. So let's do that in the very next video. Hello Rails is my new course on Ruby on Rails. I'll teach you Ruby on Rails from the ground up. Visit hellorails.io for more information.